All right, welcome to another episode of ex-vicarious. I'm Braith, and today I'm joined by Jason Zhu He. Jason has actually featured on the ex-vicarious Q&A before, but for those who haven't read it, Jason is currently building Ikigai Network, a streaming service for finding meaningful careers that has partnered with the likes of Mervac and Clayton Utes. He's also the co-founder of the Australian Law Student podcast and is working as a legal assistant at Sydney Arbitration Chambers whilst pursuing a Bachelor of Law at USyd. One of the coolest things I learned from our chat before is that Jason does new sport every few months, ranging from scuba diving, cycling, and Muay Thai. So I'm actually trying to still get a spa session in with him. But for now, yeah. Anyways, Jason, how are you going today?
Very good. Very excited to be on. Big fan of all the work you've done and very honored to be part of this.
Likewise, and I'm really keen to dip into it. All right, so I spent a lot of sleepless nights thinking, how do I become the best version of myself and leave my mark on the world? To answer this, I decided to ask exceptional people who have or are on the journey of doing just that. When you have big dreams, it's easy to just fantasize about them and live vicariously through your idols. But that's not how I want to live. So if you feel the same way, this podcast will show you how to make your dreams look more like goals by showing you how founders, creators, and game changers did it. You'll learn about their habits, mindsets, and strategies so you can stop dreaming and start dream making. I'm Braith, and this is ex-vicarious. Just wanted to start with one of the things I found pretty interesting on your experiences on your LinkedIn. Saw that you did videography for the Manly Sea Eagles. How'd you land that? And are they actually your footy team?
Yeah, it's funny because I have no motor skills whatsoever when it comes to like ball sports. I very occasionally follow rugby overall. So how I landed that was I was looking for a way to upskill myself in terms of videography. Taking a few steps back, my mum bought me a video camera, just a very basic one for my 16th birthday. And I was learning how to use it and also video editing. I had a few YouTubers that I really looked up to, Sam Calder, Peter McKinnon, like those kind of like travel videographers. And I was getting into making sports videos. And I lived pretty close to where the Manly Sea Eagles have their main stadium in Brookvale. And I was like, they're my local footy team. Why don't I reach out? I don't even know how I reached out, but I figured out who the right person to contact was. And they essentially got me to come in for one of their games. I think it was against the Newcastle Knights on Sunday. And it was also a day where all of their old players in years past came by, and it was just about filming that event. So it was my first taste given a brief, an event photography, short period of time, things I had to hit, which is all very similar to what I'm doing at the moment now.
Yeah, that's awesome. So did they do any interviews with you beforehand, or was it just, come in and show us what you got, and that's the way that they assessed if you were to continue working with them afterwards?
Yeah, so no, there was nothing. Literally, I probably sent a few videos or something like that as a portfolio, and then said I'd be really interested in doing anything at all, be it paid or unpaid. And this Ben was his name, really kind guy, reached out and was like, "Hey, we'd love to have you on just for a single project." And yeah, and they had me in.
Yeah, so in terms of everything videography wise afterwards, how would you say that experience and just doing videography there has helped you?
Yeah, so I guess I've been pretty lucky in that I've taken videography as a skill and I've levered it into the startup space, which is where I'm at now. And so for a bit of background, a few years ago, I co-founded Ikigai Network, which is essentially we film interesting videos of people and we talk about their careers, what it is they do, how they got there, and we put it on this kind of streaming service platform, Netflix or YouTube. Students can come along and watch. So initially, I was, to a large degree, I still am, behind the camera, doing the shoots, as well as doing a large amount of the editing. And that kind of like a skill in terms of being able to produce the actual output is what enabled me to leave. I levered that skill to be able to do more of the arguably even more interesting stuff in terms of the business, the actual development of the business, selling to clients, figuring out how our business model is actually going to work, pitching to clients, developing relationships with our users and our students. And so it's been hugely instrumental, both the Manly experience and all sorts of other video experience in terms of where I am today.
Yeah, and delving into the name a little bit more, for people who don't know, could you tell us what Ikigai is, what it means to you personally, and how it's helped you shape the way you guys run the company and the impact you try to have?
Sure. Ikigai, it's a Japanese concept or phrase that roughly translates to reason to get up in the morning. It was my co-founders and I came across it first in the book of the same name by Heather Cleary and Hector Garcia. Would highly recommend giving it a read. In terms of what it means to us and how it's shaped the company, it's been very much at the core of what we do because there's this fantastic kind of Venn diagram in the book where the authors talk about if you can find what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for, you found your ikigai. And obviously that's a lot easier said than done. But even just crystallizing what it is that you really want out of your life and your career is, I think, very helpful. And we've used that in many ways, both in terms of we've tried to purposely choose a good mix of people. We've got some more traditional industries like law, business, medicine, banking, accounting, things like that. But we also have some people who have gone off that beaten path. They've done something they really enjoy and that they're good at and the world needs. And then they've tried to figure out, how can I be paid for it? We have had musicians, we've had YouTubers, we've had a marine biologist who then turned into a vertical farmer, so an entrepreneur type thing in the science space. And I think it's just having that broad range. And for me personally, being able to speak to all of those people, it's been hugely instrumental in terms of how I make my own career decisions. So it's just been fantastic.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I'm going to put the book in the show notes as well so people can find it. In terms of finding your own Ikigai, would you say that's something you have now, or did you have it? Do you think you found it before you actually started the company, or was it somehow related to the journey of creating the company and talking to all these different people from all these different walks of life that helped you find yours?
I definitely think my personal ikigai, I'm still quite young, only 21. It's still very much something I'm trying to discover and trying to find. But I definitely think the more entrepreneurial side, building, operating companies, and really trying to do something that is of value to people and helps other people is definitely something that I really enjoy. And that will probably be my guiding focus over at least the next few years.
Yeah, so with that sort of focus and the fact that you're also working at a legal chamber at the moment, you're obviously studying law at the same time. How do you manage these different types of focuses, and where is the part where they intersect for you?
Mhm. Managing it is definitely very difficult. It tends to be that I'm in a very fortunate position where all of my various commitments and interests are relatively flexible. Uni will peak around mid-semester when you have mid-semester exams, and then towards the end of semester when you have final exams. So 4 times a year, there will be an incredibly busy period, and then everything else obviously has to take a step back because marks are important to me. And for Ikigai and the various businesses that I operate, it's usually if there's a particular client that needs a deliverable created, whether it's a video, whether it's a slide deck or something like that, that's when you have peaks and troughs in terms of busyness. And it's definitely great in terms of being the co-founder and also being in charge of that video pipeline. I can very much control when the dates are, when those busy periods are. In terms of the other jobs as well, I've always been very fortunate that I've had employers who are very understanding and I have a great deal of flexibility. Sorry, I've forgotten the second part of your question.
Yeah, so where do you find the intersection between all these varied interests and passions of yours?
I definitely think, as I said in my previous answer, the business aspect of these various interests is what really stands out to me. Like in arbitration, sorry, I work in an arbitration chambers, so it's like a disputes. You can think of it like litigation. For me, the most interesting part of that is seeing the commercial parties, what it is they do. You get to read these pieces of information, or you get to read cases or examples about these businesses and what it is they actually do in the world. You know, steel mills and you have energy projects and things like that, and understanding their business model. Similarly, for the businesses that I own, is like the selling, how do we make this into a profitable business by producing something that our our customers really like. I also don't necessarily see it always as an intersection, all the various things that I do, but just various discrete things that I'm interested in and I do. And it kind of, again, helps me make my own decision as to what my Ikigai is. I feel very fortunate that I have had a lot of experiences in different things, and I know what I do, what aspects I like, and what I perhaps don't like as much, and that can guide my career going forwards.
Yeah, that's awesome. So now I wanted to jump back a little bit to when you were still in high school. So I noticed that you were a prefect at Sydney Grammar. And whilst you were a prefect, you had an idea for raising $20,000 for the Motor Neuron Disease Foundation. Why was this initiative important to you? And what were the biggest learnings when you're facilitating this initiative?
Yeah. So why we did it. So every year, for context, the prefects of the school pick a charity. And in this particular year, it was definitely a cause that was very close to all of our hearts. It was a close friend of mine and many of ours. His father had passed away from motor neuron disease, I think the year prior. And so that was what we picked. That was why we picked the charity. And it was also unfortunate in that it was a COVID year. So the vast majority of the fundraising usually consisted of physical events. So you'd have barbecue sales, bake sales, fun runs, things like that. So physical events. And obviously in COVID, none of those things happened. And we had to try and figure out a way to try and raise some amount of money. It was really not looking, from memory, it wasn't terrible, but it was definitely less than previous years in terms of how do we raise a large amount of money. And the previous year had done it, but essentially I was taking the same idea and just doing it again and trying to do it bigger and better. And the biggest learnings, I think, was it's very similar to sales and Ikigai in a way, in that you, on one side, you have the users. So it's like the people who are buying the raffle tickets. On the other side, you have the donors of the gifts, and you have to try and figure out what the incentives are for both of those sides. So for the people buying the raffle tickets, you had to have great raffle prizes and also relatively reasonable prices per ticket, and try and pump out as many tickets as possible. And on the other side, for the people donating the gifts, the school community was very generous. And also we went out to a few like companies and things like that, trying to be like, hey, we're trying to raise money for a great cause. Would you be able to donate anything? So yeah, it's almost just uncanny how similar so many aspects of my life and my experience have just been this kind of trying to run this two-sided marketplace where you're selling and also trying to create a product at the same time.
Yeah, okay. For that two-sided marketplace, I was going to mention it. It is very similar to what I see you're doing at Ikigai. For the Australian law student, could you give us a little brief rundown on how that started, the sort of impact you want to have with that, and afterwards, like also a little bit of the business parts of that too?
Sure. I did not come up with the idea. So I actually joined a few months after it was set up. My co-founders, Ollie, Nick, and Henry, had already done a few pilot episodes and were doing very well. And I think Nick reached out to me on LinkedIn and we had a chat. And in terms of what it does and why it's so good, and I definitely can't take the credit in terms of coming up with the concept, but it's just a fantastic resource for law students. They're commuting or they're just doing the laundry. They put on the podcast and they listen to all sorts of things that are of interest to them and potentially ultimately beneficial for their careers. We do a lot of interviews of various people in various practice areas and talk about, very similar to Ikigai, what it is you do, what kind of law you practice, who would enjoy it, how do you get there, what stage of the career are you at. And I think that's just hugely beneficial for almost that kind of like level of detail within the law profession that Ikigai can't really get to. We film one lawyer and we have to cater to like basically every other industry out there. And the Australian law student is able to take these long form podcasts with people, really delve into the nitty gritty of what actually differentiates, say, a criminal lawyer from a litigation lawyer, from a banking and transactional partner, from a judge, etc. In terms of the business and why I came on board was that, once again, it's that two-sided marketplace model. We produce great content. Well, more broadly speaking, my co-founders produce great content. I'm less involved with the content production, particularly Ollie, and students find it of value. They listen to it, and thus we get a following. And then we monetize that by going to corporate sponsors like law firms and who are trying to promote their graduate opportunities and have a need to reach this particular audience that we have. And we charge them the right to collaborate with us, to have postings upon our socials and things like that. And in terms of that, that is essentially like the key business learning in terms of the business model. And we're branching out from that and we're trying to figure out other ways to monetize the platform. But that was the reason I joined, was because I have quite a bit of experience in terms of how do you run an entire sales distribution network for corporates.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, are your co-founders also studying law at the moment?
Yes, they're all at
Yeah.
study.
Yeah. So, how do you think for you and your co founders, by running the Australian Law Student podcast, being able to get in touch with all these different law firms, how has it actually helped you guys when you're looking out for law jobs for yourself and trying to get experience in legal practice?
It's funny because it's the third time it's already come up, but again, it's like this marketplace almost, where I realized that like HR people essentially are competing with each other for the best talent as well. The yeah the yeah they're competing for the best talent, and it sounds blatantly obvious, but it's so interesting hearing it from the other side of the coin, is just doing things to help make yourself stand out in terms of that resume pile. And all of us are going for the clerkships this year, and just having baseline interesting things like work experience, and sorry, baseline like things such as relatively good grades, relevant work experience, things like that, and then trying to put that little icing on the cake and do those things that make yourself stand out to employers. It's very clear that they are competing for the best graduates, and similarly, you want to stand out to them.
Yeah. And I guess in terms of standing out and being able to talk to all these HR reps, if someone is trying to get into clerkships or get into law as a student, what do you think are the most important things to prioritize? So, like between marks, doing your own sort of thing to stand out, and like all the different factors, how would you say they rank when the HR reps are looking at different students to choose from?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And obviously, there's no one size fits all. I can only speak to my own gut feeling as an applicant and having engaged with some HR people. I'd almost think about it in terms of there's a kind of a threshold that you need to cross at each stage. To get to the, say, first round interview, you might have CV, cover letter, transcript, maybe a few questions, two out of those four. And you just need to be able to cross that threshold to get to the interviews, and then it's a different ballgame. So obviously, like relatively strong marks, depends on your uni, depends on the courses you take. Obviously, it varies. And relevant work experience, maybe some law related extracurriculars like writing for the Law Society Journal or mooting or competitions, Law Society, things like that. And I think that's probably, and maybe one or two things that make you stand out, whether it's a fundraising thing or something entrepreneurial, can be useful. I personally think that's probably enough to get you to the interview stage. And then once you get to the interview stage, it's very interesting because it's entirely flipped. And I don't really think many of the firms care that much about like marks. They care about how you're like as a person. You know, you're going to be, let's face it, working long hours with these people. They want to know that they're going to be able to stand you. And of course, they're looking for a little bit of flair. Some people might be looking for commerciality and things like that. So trying to figure out exactly what each firm's looking for particularly, and trying to highlight bits of your experience, whether it's life or professional or studying experience, go towards that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wanted to look at a bit of a comparison between two aspects of as a law student and someone applying to different clerkships and all of that. You would be competing against thousands of different students who are at the very top of the state if you're applying to different jobs in our state. But when you're doing the more entrepreneurial stuff, for example, like Ikigai Network, you may not necessarily be competing against anyone because you're doing something that's new, something that's unique. So yeah, I wanted to delve into what's the mindset like when you're doing something where you're competing against a lot of different people who are doing technically the same thing versus where you're doing something that's more like trailblazing and doing something where you're not necessarily competing, but in both instances, you're still trying to be the best at it or excel at it. Are there any differences in your mindset when you approach the two, or do you even perceive it any differently?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I was actually thinking about this yesterday and talking with a friend about it. I think the way to distinguish between the two is almost, I think, I don't have a finance background, but I think they call it an expected value type thing. So for the first path, which is like the clerkships well-trodden path, it's theoretically the expected value of success is relatively high if you are able to tick all the right boxes, which in and of itself is a difficult thing to do. But it's if you have good marks, if you have relevant work experience, if you have moving experience, if you have, and then a little bit of volunteering or something like that, the expected value, the likelihood of you being in a good position relative to like law firms is quite high. However, the upside is somewhat capped at, admittedly, a very high salary for lawyers, but it is capped at that. On the other hand, with something like startups, it is the likelihood of success is just significantly lower, right? You could be fantastic, you might be in a great economic tailwind, you might have the best talent in the world, and then just something just doesn't go right and it just doesn't work out. But then on the other hand, the potential upside in terms of financial and everything is just significantly higher. So it's about really your risk appetite and also what you enjoy. It goes back to those Ikigai factors, right? What is your risk appetite like? And how likely do you think it is that you can achieve either of those? And how happy would you be to achieve either of those? And then once you weigh up those factors subjectively, then you can make a calculated decision as to which you want to pursue. At the moment, for me, I'm just hedging my bets and doing both.
Yeah, I actually wanted to delve into risk appetite. I love how you mentioned it. How would you describe your own risk appetite? I know that you said you are doing both. And how has your risk appetite changed throughout your lifetime? What sort of things have affected it, would you say?
Yeah, interesting one. I think that for an entrepreneur, I think my risk appetite's relatively low. I am not one of those people, and I have absolute great respect for them, and I wish I have done this a little bit, where it's just throw everything to the wind, just fully commit to your thing. I think partially the reason for that is I don't think it's absolutely necessary that I do that for Ikigai Network and the Australian law student and whatever else I've got going on. I think that just having the kind of job security and financial security of a regular white collar job is invaluable in a way. And my plan is to use that as a stepping stone to whatever else it is if I wanted to go down the entrepreneurial path. So it's like taking calculated risks rather than just throwing everything to the wind. The reason for that is because I think it's very easy, especially at our age, to consume a lot of media and read a lot of inspirational stories and they'd be like, I'm going to just start my own thing now. And what you don't realize about the people that we may admire or dislike but are very successful, Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, all those types of founders, Silicon Valley founders and whatnot, is that they have had very decent careers for the most part. Zuckerberg and probably Bill Gates would be an exception before they actually went off and did what it is that they did. Jeff Bezos was, I think, like basically a VP at D Shaw before he went off and started Amazon. So I think that if you don't have the ability to just throw everything to the wind and you don't have the financial support the financial security of knowing that you don't need to have a relatively normal job, then you can go do that. But if you're not able to just immediately go start your own thing, then you have to be very calculated in how you take your risks. And that's the approach I'm taking.
Yeah. And in terms of getting to a stage where you are happy to burn the boats, just go all in on one of your own entrepreneurial ventures. Let's just take Ikigai Network as an example, right? So in, let's say, around 2 3 years time, you'll be working full-time as a lawyer, and let's say you're still running Ikigai Network. At what point, what sort of signs need to be ticked off for you to be like, okay, this is when I can go all in on Ikigai? It's not so much what you've gotten from the law side of things. It's not like you've saved up a certain amount from law or reached a really high point in law. More, that's just, let's say, that's keeping you secure in the shorter meantime. But for Ikigai, what sort of things do you think you need to accomplish with that are going to tick off the box for you to just go all in on
Yeah,
that?
I think it could potentially be shorter than 2 to 3 years realistically. And I think there are two things that I would probably look for. One is a very quantitative thing in terms of how much like recurring revenue are we generating from, and probably from like video production, or really trying to leverage the network and charge essentially advertising sponsored slots on the network for those corporates. And the second is what type of, more qualitative, what type of offerings do we actually have? And are they places with a high potential to grow very quickly and scale very quickly? And what I mean by that is that right now, Ikigai's business model is producing videos and charging for the videos and potentially charging a little bit for the corporates to put it on the platform. That is very much constrained by who we have to film and edit the videos. It's not very scalable. I'm really looking at moving into something, forms of content and forms of engagement that are a lot more scalable. Still thinking of to what exactly that might be. But I think once we crack that, and we're able to ramp up whatever that might be, I think then it will be in a pretty good space to be able to take it more full time.
Yeah, that's really cool. In terms of the time spent thinking of the next thing to make it more scalable, and just in general, when you're spending some of that more creative or strategy focus on the business versus all the things that you need to do day to day, how do you split that time up? Do you time block it so you get to focus on those things separately, or do they intersect with each other? How does it work when you're trying to work on these two different areas?
Yeah, great question. I think that it's very interesting because I think that creativity for me comes from analogizing to things that I already know. And what I mean by that is it's a very, I think, almost like a law way of thinking, in that in common law jurisdiction like Australia, you have a lot of case law. A lot of our laws are based on cases. And essentially, to be able to apply that to a new situation, you have to recognize similar or different features between the existing body of cases and what's before you. And to answer your question more directly, I listen to podcasts. Mainly, I listen to podcasts, and sometimes I read the news as well. And I have a particular interest in business news and businesses. Particularly great podcast is Acquired, which is just stories of companies. And the more kind of things I listen and the more learnings I take away, the more business models I come to understand of companies' everyday lives, I think the better position I am to analogize that to our present case and be like, take a little bit as a bit of an aspect from that and a bit of an aspect from that. A lot of the companies, by nature of being on the podcast, they're incredibly large. So not all aspects of their business model will fit for us. But I feel like that is probably the best way. And it's just a nice thing to do when I'm doing chores or going for a walk or commuting and things like that.
Yeah, acquired. I'll put that in the show notes as well for people
Fantastic.
to find. Just out of curiosity, if we're looking really far in the future, obviously you already done a lot of different entrepreneurial things. But to you, what would you say is more valuable to you? A company that you own but you don't need to run. So let's say you've built it up, you own it, you're still on the board or something. You don't need to run it day to day, but you're still like the majority owner of it. Or as the name suggests, like something, a company that you can get to a point where you can just sell it off and not worry about it and live off whatever you've earned from that. Like which one of those two options is more attractive to you?
I think obviously I'd probably say the first one, in that when you found something, it's like a child to you. There's a very deep sense of wanting to stay with it and watch it grow, even if it's at an arm's length. I think, however, in defense of the second option, the fact that you're able to sell it off indicates that it is of great value, even if not to you, at least to someone potentially with the resources to take it to the next step. So that is also definitely something that's worthwhile. And I think it's also just like keeping your options open, because like Elon Musk built Zip2 and then used the money from that to found SpaceX and Tesla. So it's just one jumping from one lily pad to the next.
Yeah, almost one baby could do everything for the next one in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so Dr. James Austin. So I know you mentioned his theory about luck from motion in our Q&A. So I wanted to ask, how has luck from motion helped you find the right people to guide you towards achieving your dreams? And for people who don't know, could you give a little bit of context about what that actually is and your own experience with it?
Absolutely. Dr. Austin outlines 4 different types of luck. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. You can have blind luck, for instance, that's just completely and utterly random. The type of luck that I think has really been applicable to me is luck from motion, in that you're doing things, and even if it feels like you're not achieving very much by doing them initially, over time, if you persist in it long enough, by nature of action, and just exposure and arguably networking, you're able to be exposed to a greater likelihood of lucky opportunities coming your way. Case in point, meeting Braith and being able to be featured on this podcast. It's a huge privilege. And
You're too kind.
yeah, no, like it really is. And I think that I've just noticed that consistent incremental efforts, even I've to be honest, I've felt like giving up on Ikigai many times, and just persevering with it little by little and trying to put it out there in the most practical and most effective way possible has reaped rewards in terms of the people that it's engaged with and the opportunities that it's given to me and to the company, because it is fundamentally a challenge that really faces many young people today. So I think it really resonates with a lot of people, and people are willing to engage with that idea. Into sometimes that's all it needs. Sometimes it's just you push a little bit further, and just because of, and then you get lucky, and then someone comes along who's able to inspire you to keep going or to give you the means to keep going.
Yeah. So when you said those times you thought about giving up when it's gotten really hard,
Mm.
are there certain habits that pushed you through it, or was it certain a certain mindset, certain voice in your mind that helped you keep persisting?
Yeah, I'd love to give you probably the answer that you and the listeners probably want to hear, which is that yes, I persisted because I'm dying dream of like building. And to be honest, that's just not the case. I think that what's gotten me through it is really 2 things which may be unexpected. The first is external pressure. It's that by working consistently, there have been clients that come in, opportunities that have come in, and it's suddenly just come in at a point where I feel, oh, this is it. There's not much else to do here. Almost like that quiet quitting phenomenon, right? There's not much going on. I'll just put it to the side for a bit. And then an email comes in one day, there's an opportunity, there's a call to have, and then that blossoms into a further opportunity. Just consistently taking those efforts. An example of that would be our relationship with Mirvac. They're one of our biggest clients. And initially it was I managed to get an interview completely pro bono with the former CEO, and filmed an interview with her, and then showed that to the Mirvac head of HR. And then a year late, 6 months later, the head of HR bounces it to this HR coordinator, and then the HR coordinator delegates it to an intern, and then the intern finally does a paid project with us, and that was like one of our first paid projects. So it's just like consistent incremental efforts, luck through motion, when you're not doing very much, and then in those it comes back full circle and gives you the motivation to keep going when you feel like you want to quit. So the other thing is that having the right people around you who will encourage you to keep going. I definitely think my co-founders have been that for me.
Yeah, I love that. In terms of Mervac, I was really interested to hear. You said you were able to do some work for the ex CEO, was it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so how did you actually get in contact with her? And yeah, how did that opportunity come about?
It's funny. I worked on the raffle that we were talking about earlier with her son, and he very
Right.
kindly put me in touch. And it was a private school, and you have like fantastic connections coming from that. But I think just being able to like network and being able to leverage your networks in a way that's not unnice, I think is the key. But it's just, hey, I've got this thing that I'm working on. You might be able to help me with that. Is it okay if we have a chat? And just phrasing it like that, no obligations or anything like that, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, I wanted to actually delve into networking a little bit because I noticed that if we compare this example where you were lucky enough to work with a son with other examples where, for example, Manly Sea Eagles, they just happened to be your local gym, and it was someone you had no prior contact with at all, prior connection with at all. How do you approach these two networking situations separately, like when you have some sort of connection versus none at all? And yeah, what do you think is most important when you are just networking in general?
I think to answer your first question, I really don't approach them differently in that with the C equals one, where you are just literally cold emailing, it's just trying. If you don't ask, you won't know. And similarly with someone in your network who might be able to help you, it's the same again. Pardon me. It's the same again. If you don't ask, you won't ever know. And sometimes they don't feel comfortable doing it. That's completely fine and that's fair. But and respecting that is obviously very important. But I think it's just like you got to try. And that's what sales taught me as well. To the second part of your question, in terms of what's really important when networking, I think just being polite and also reciprocal are probably the two most important things. So in terms of polite, it's just being like I said earlier, hey, I'm doing something. You might be able to help me with this. This is what I would find really helpful. Hopefully, it's not too much of a commitment for you. Is that okay? Completely. And I almost always say at the end of my requests, completely feel free to say no, and then being reciprocal and paying it forward, even not necessarily to the same person, someone in the same situation, especially say young law students. I've informally mentored their I'm applying for such and such program, such and such clerkship, maybe a mooch, and I can help. I always try as much as possible to put them in touch with the right person.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I've found personally in my own journey, like with outreaching, I'm a little bit more comfortable with it now. But before I did many outreaches at all, there was obviously worries about rejection or how this person may think of me, what the relationship will be like afterwards. For you, did that ever stop you from outreaching people in the past? And can you just, yeah, talk on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It still definitely does as well, because that's such a human. It's part of human nature to fear rejection, right? I think the way to go about it is, again, it's just phrasing it in a very polite way that doesn't require too much. It's not asking too much, and it's use your social cues to figure out what's appropriate in the situation. If you've just connected with this person on LinkedIn and you're like, hey, would you like to invest $100,000 in my company or something like that? It's very much okay to reach out to a random person and be like, hey, I've seen something that you do. It's really interesting to me. Can we just grab a coffee or even have a Zoom call or something like that? And yeah, I think just adjusting what is appropriate to the situation based on how well you know the person.
I wanted to hop back onto the hobbies and like the different types of sports that you've been doing. Like, what is the sport you've been doing recently? Just out of curiosity.
I've actually gotten back into the gym and lifting weights because it's quick and there's a gym close
Mm.
by to me. Previously, I think for the past over the summer, it was swimming, and then before that, it was cycling.
Yeah. So for the gym, do you have a specific schedule for it?
I don't have a schedule. I just try and fit it in wherever I can. I try and go as 3 or 4 times a week, but that's not always possible. I think the interesting thing for me in terms of exercise is just habit, and many things is that habit. I just found this program online. There's an A, B, and C day, and now that I've done it probably 4 or 5 rotations through, I just look at my phone and mentally it's very easy for me to just go into the gym and be like, all right, today's an A day, this is what we're going to start with, and then
Mm.
I meant to almost mentally pace myself. It's like, hey, I've got 20 minutes left, I'm almost done. And that just makes it a lot more frictionless. And I think that also applies to things like work and study and trying to get into the flow zone. I sometimes, if I really need to study, I'll go downstairs, I'll just have my laptop instead of my main PC, and I'll just study there and have noise canceling headphones and a glass of water, and then just be able to focus for longer than I would otherwise.
Yeah. And when it comes to these habits and hobbies and different sports that you've been doing across every few months, is your mindset when you start a new one to reach a certain goal, or do you use it as a way for you to take your mind off all of the different business things that you're thinking about?
Definitely both. I don't necessarily set off with the intention of I've got to hit this metric in X months.
Mm.
But I think it's more so I want to gain a vague level of competence. And people are like, yes, you should set specific, measurable, actionable. I forgot the R and the T of the smart goals. And that's definitely not smart, but it's just for me, it's almost like a challenge. It's like, all right, I want to
Mm.
get good at something. And it's not always a sport either. Sometimes it's like an art or something like that. And yeah, I go towards that, and it's definitely a release as well.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. In terms of the Q&A, when you mentioned you try to fit in as many coffee chats as possible, do you have a certain limit for yourself or certain days that you try to put them on? Or is it just basically whenever there is a spot free in your calendar?
Yeah, I think it's realistically whenever there's a spot free. I have noticed in terms of my own working habits, I tend to need a long uninterrupted period. So, for
Mm,
instance, if I have a class in the morning at 9 to 11 and then a class again at 1, I might try and cram a few things in there, whether it be errands or like coffee with people, because even that period of time, by the time I get out of class, have lunch, and then sit down to study, it's not really enough time for me to focus. So if there's a long, if it just so happens I'm looking at a week on a calendar and there's a bit of a gap somewhere there, unless it's quite urgent, I try and protect that large gap and then try and cram coffees with people or just even just chores and things like that into some of the smaller gaps.
yeah, all right. Taking a bit of right turn, I wanted to ask you about the two podcasts that you're involved with, right? The Australian student, law student podcast and with Ikigai, not just podcasts, but like with anyone you interview. Yeah, who would you say are the most interesting guests you've had on and why?
Yeah. So definitely up there is Tony Abbott that we had on Ikigai Network. Um, Now, I personally don't agree with many of his policies, but it's incredible to be able to have access to a former prime minister and pick his brains. I think it was really interesting hearing him talk about this idea of like civil service and contribution to your community, whether it's through public office or whether it's through just being a good person and doing what it is that you do well and contributing to your community in that way. I think that was very interesting. And he also gave a very interesting answer in terms of I asked him what would you do differently if you had your time again, and he said that the French electric submarine deal was a mistake, which was very funny, as Scott Morrison had, I think, just reneged on the deal with the French and then announced AUKUS and all that debacle. Another very interesting person, perhaps on the another interesting Ikigai interview, was Simone, the vertical farmer I told you about earlier, and it's just so interesting to hear another entrepreneur and all the failures and the pain she had to go through, and the fantastic work she's doing. In terms of the Australian law student side, um, I don't have very much involvement in terms of picking the guests or even like writing the questions, but I know there are a few fantastic guests we've got lined up for this season. I don't know how much I could say, but we've got two fantastic judges, and it's just fantastic hearing them talk about their experience. And it's amazing to hear these people who are so steeped in the law and have so much knowledge about such a niche, but also incredibly important field of our lives.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, is there any certain part of the law that you've learnt about that like most people wouldn't know about that has been really interesting or like surprised you?
Yeah, so it definitely has to be commercial arbitration. I did a moot in this area, and the uni paid for my team and myself to go to Europe earlier this year, which was phenomenal.
Yeah, it's so
So
cool.
the area of law arbitration it's a dispute settlement method where people will sign, say, Braith, you want to sign a record deal with me, say I'm a singer, maybe there's an arbitration clause in that. So instead of something going wrong and me suing you or vice versa, we take it to a third party arbitrator that we can both pick, and they will
Mhm.
settle the dispute. And it's just this super interesting kind of mini removed world from litigation with its benefits and disadvantages. But yeah, it's an incredibly large and commonly used way to settle large commercial disputes. So very interesting to learn about.
Yeah, that's really cool. I wanted to go back to another point in the Q&A. I know you mentioned OneSec, and it's actually an app that I use myself as well. But yeah, just wanted to ask, how has it improved your productivity and focus? And for the people who don't know what it is, could you just give a brief rundown on like how you
I,
why you downloaded it and what it does for you?
I'll give you a demo. So if I open an app that I use too much, it'll like should. There you go. I don't know if you can
Yeah.
read that, but it displays a message. Mine is get to fucking work. And, and
Yeah, I just saw the message.
yeah, so it puts a little speed bump in terms of your almost like compulsive habits of picking up your phone and
Mm,
going to those comfort apps. I think it's just so important for me because I definitely get very distracted. It's why I need many hours to sit down and focus and to do work. I noticed that before I had it, there were definitely many apps like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, where you just feel this terrible compulsion throughout the day where it's like, oh, has anyone sent me a meme? Has anyone messaged me?
Yeah.
Has any of the groups that I'm in had something's happened in the group that I need to know about now? And if you take a step back and think about it rationally, there's very few things that would actually need you to know then and there. Keep my text messages off 1 second. I have the notifications that come through. But having installed that and setting relatively longer wait times for those more problematic apps has really helped me be very conscious about using those apps. And it helped me reclaim a lot of time lost in my day that I was just opening it up as a habit, and then suddenly 5-10 minutes have gone.
Yeah. I mean, it's awesome. And if anyone from One Sec is listening, feel free to reach out to either one of us. I'm sure we can, get more people using it because it is crazy
It's
how
so good.
how helpful it is. And Viv, yeah, my partner, she actually she hates it because every time she tries to just look at something quickly, she's, what is this? And then she can't be bothered looking at it anymore. So
That's
yeah,
wait,
it's pretty funny.
wait.
uh, so for the rest of the year and maybe into first half of next year, what would you say are your major goals for Ikigai or just personally?
I think for Ikigai, I really want to build out, figure out what that elusive new business model or product offering is. And second, try and build out a more recurring revenue funnel because admittedly at the moment it's dependent upon one or two large clients. Although that's what professional services is like as well. Big law firms will also have one or two major clients that keep coming back. So I think those are the goals for Ikigai. For, say, the Australian law student, I definitely think also something similar, although perhaps at a lesser scale, because it's just about
Yeah.
maybe a year or so behind in terms of that development in terms of it as a business. Personally, I would like to really try and explore more careers that are out there and talk to more people, figure out what it is that I want to do. And also, pardon me, a question of also where potentially, if I want to go overseas, and if so, where and to do what.
Yeah, really interesting. And because I am looking forward to getting you back on in a couple of months as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting just to see like what have the learnings been in that time and everything. I wanted to now ask you a question that I ask every guest. So if you had to live your life following the words of one single quote, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good one. There's a really good quote from The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. Let me see how I can, because it requires a great deal of context. So there's a story within the book of this young boy who goes to find the secret to happiness from this wise man who lives in a fantastic castle. And the wise man, it's a long waiting list to go and see the wise man. And the wise man the boy finally gets to see the wise man, and the wise man sends him off with a teaspoon with oil in it. And he says, "Go see my house, but don't drop a drop of oil from the teaspoon." And the boy, obviously, as anyone would, goes around the house, returns like 2 hours later, and the drops of oil are still there. And the wise man said, "Did you see like my beautiful tapestries? Did you see my wonderful garden?" And the boy was like, "No, I was trying to make sure I didn't spill this drop like you told me to." I was like, "No, I want you to go see all these things. It's really important that you see my house." And the boy goes off again and sees all these wonderful things. Says, I saw all your lovely gardens and your house and whatever." And the wise man's like, "Where are the drops of oil?" And the boy looks down and the drops of oil are obviously gone because he's been distracted. And so the wise man says, and this is the quote I live by, "The secret to happiness is to see all the wonders of the world, but never to forget about the drops of oil in the spoon." So that balance between enjoying your life and doing something really fulfilling, but also the practicalities of life, I think that's very important.
Yeah, I really love that. And just curious, would you say you read more fiction or non-fiction?
Definitely fiction now, unfortunately. Sorry, non-fiction now, unfortunately. Definitely want to reread some of the classics that I were reading when I was a bit younger.
Yeah, The Alchemist. I'll put that in the show notes, and I think I got to read it myself as well because it's been recommended a couple times, but I really love the way you described that. Now, the final question is actually from last previous guest, so Will Eisenhuth, and he wanted to ask you, in 20 years' time, what do you want a boring Tuesday to look like for you?
Oh, that's a really good question.
So yeah, the context is you probably picked up on it anyways, but usually people are dreading Mondays and excited for Fridays and Saturdays. Tuesday doesn't really have that feeling attached to it.
Yep.
So yeah, what would you want that boring Tuesday to be like when it's 20 years time in the future?
Sorry. I think that I would, in 20 years' time, still very much would like to be running my own company. In what field, I don't know. I suspect it's going to be something related to tech, given my computer science background. I think I would really love to be able to have a large amount of personal interaction with people and also spending a lot of time thinking about analyzing and making decisions based on data, almost like conducting mini experiments within the company. That is what I'd really love to be able to do. And almost as importantly, be able to leave at a reasonable hour and go home to presumably a family and to be able to get to
Mm.
bed at a reasonable hour. I think that's how I define it.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. So yeah, now it's your turn to ask a question for the next
And
guest.
do we know who the next guest is?
No,
Okay, that's great. That's great.
so
Okay,
it's a mystery. It's a mystery.
fair enough. That's it. Just give me 1 second. That's a really tough one to follow. I think I don't know how practical it is because you might have to retell that whole story, and I can send you the passage from The Alchemist. But presuming that they've been told the whole story, what do you feel like the drops of oil in the spoon are? And more importantly, what do you feel like seeing the wonders of the world would mean to you?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, okay. I like that. I like that. I'll give them a brief rundown on the
Sure.
story as well before I ask that question. But yeah, love that. Final thing, where do you want to direct audiences to? Like, how can they get in contact with you or any of the things you're doing?
Yeah.
Where would you like to direct people?
Um, Probably the best place to reach me personally would be my LinkedIn, just Jason Zhu He on LinkedIn. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, feedbacks, whether it's related to law, careers, Ikigai, starting companies, feel free to reach out. I would definitely encourage them to have a look at both Ikigai Network. You can just look up ikigainetwork.io and check out our catalog. And if you like it or don't like it, let me know. And same with the Australian law student. I really feel like I'm in a very lucky position to be able to speak to and produce a lot of content in relation to careers and to be able to help people find their Ikigai. And so, yeah, I'd love to be able to hear and direct the audience to that.
Yeah, awesome. I'll put all the links to all of that in the show notes for people. And thank you so much, Jason, for taking the time. Yeah, it was awesome to chat.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.